In the parish archives of a small church on the northern border of Mexico, buried beneath decades of dust and silence, lies a record that the ecclesiastical authorities have kept hidden for more than 2 centuries. It is said to contain the confessions of Father Tomás Saldivar, written in ink that some claim was mixed with blood. Within those pages, he detailed the most atrocious crimes ever committed in the name of God and the Spanish crown. Between 1748 and 1796, the Saldivar family not only ruled the northern frontier of Mexico, they turned it into a human slaughterhouse, where more than 3,000 souls vanished without a trace. The colonial authorities never investigated, for they too profited from the family's monstrous enterprise. Today, for the first time, we will reveal the full truth about the Saldivars. A truth so disturbing it will forever change how you perceive the limits of human evil. Before we continue, I ask something of you. If you have the courage to listen until the end, subscribe now, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We are a brotherhood of mystery hunters, and I love knowing where my fellow explorers of the darkness reside. Now then, to truly understand what happened, we must return to the very beginning, to the moment when a young captain named Ignacio Saldivar received an assignment that would turn him into the demon of the frontier. The year was 1748. New Spain stretched northward like an open wound across the desert. The border with the uncolonized lands was a line drawn in invisible blood, traced by the sweat and tears of those who dared to cross it. In this inhospitable region, where the scorching sun of the day gave way to freezing nights that could cut through bone, stood the presidio of San Miguel de los Reyes, a fortress of stone and adobe that looked less like a military post and more like a prison. The land was known for its eternal winds, which carried sand and secrets alike, creating swirling dust devils that the locals called the whispers of the dead. The nearby mountains, black as coal beneath the merciless sun, hid veins of silver that had drawn the Spanish settlers decades before. But it wasn't the silver that made the region truly valuable. It was its strategic location. San Miguel was the only reliable passage between the colonized territories and the wild lands to the north, a crossroads for merchants, smugglers, slavers, and fugitives alike. The presidio was commanded by Captain Ignacio Saldivar, a man whose name would soon be whispered in fear from Sonora to Coahuila. Ignacio was unlike other frontier captains. At only 25, he had arrived with a personal recommendation from the viceroy, a smile that froze blood, and an intelligence he used solely for wicked ends. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jet-black beard meticulously trimmed even in the desert, Ignacio possessed cold gray eyes that seemed to calculate the monetary value of every person he met. The Saldivar family was no stranger to the art of survival. Ignacio's father had been a slave trader on the coasts of Veracruz, and his mother came from a family of landowners who had built their fortune upon the backs of indigenous laborers. From childhood, Ignacio had learned that people were merely commodities, and that morality was a luxury only the well-fed could afford. When Ignacio arrived at the presidio, he brought with him his 3 sons. Rodrigo, 20 years old, brutal and bloodthirsty, who delighted in the suffering of others. Diego, 18, colder, more calculating, but no less cruel. And the youngest, Tomás, only 16, destined from birth to serve the church. Tomás already wore the humble brown habit of a Franciscan friar, but beneath his pious facade lay a heart as corrupted as that of his brothers. The small adobe chapel at the presidio, its single tower pointing toward heaven like an accusing finger, soon became Tomás's domain. There, under the watchful gaze of a wooden Christ that seemed to suffer more than usual, the young friar began to craft his own twisted theology, one that would soon justify horrors beyond imagination. The local community consisted of soldiers, settlers, desperate traders, and ex-convicts who had come seeking fortune in this forsaken outpost. Everyone knew that survival in San Miguel de los Reyes came at a price, the price the Saldivars demanded. But none could have imagined how high that price would climb, nor that it would one day cost them not only their freedom, but their souls. The transformation of the Saldivars from guardians of the frontier into its predators began on a particularly cold night in November of 1748. That night, a caravan of French merchants attempted to cross the border, carrying with them not only goods, but also a group of women and children they had purchased as slaves in Louisiana. For days, Captain Ignacio had been observing them from the watchtowers of the Presidio. He had counted 43 people in total, 21 armed traders, 14 adult slaves, and 8 children. According to his spies, they carried chests filled with French gold coins and precious stones stolen from abandoned Jesuit missions. That evening, while the wind howled through the desert like the cries of the damned, Ignacio gathered his sons inside the chapel. The flickering candles cast long, writhing shadows on the adobe walls, and the wooden Christ seemed to weep wax tears as it stared down upon them. "My sons," Ignacio began in a deep, deliberate voice, "tonight, God puts us to the test. That caravan carries enough wealth to feed us for years. But there is something more valuable than gold. The opportunity to establish our own order in this lawless land." Tomas, the young friar, was the first to speak. "Father," he said hesitantly, "my conscience tells me we must protect those travelers, not rob them." Ignacio smiled, the same smile that once terrified pirates in the Gulf of Mexico. "Tomas, my son, your conscience must learn to tell the difference between common morality and divine will. God did not place us here as mere guards, but as lords of the frontier, and every lord has the right to demand tribute for his protection." Rodrigo, the eldest, rubbed his hands with excitement. "Then we'll attack them, father." "No," Ignacio replied, his grin widening. "We'll do something far smarter. We'll turn them into the first contributors to our new order." Diego, sharp-minded and quiet, immediately understood. "A human tribute," he murmured. Ignacio nodded. "Exactly. From this day forward, every caravan crossing our territory shall pay a tax. Not in gold, but in flesh. One person taken as a guarantee of good conduct. Officially, it will be for interrogation purposes. Unofficially," he leaned closer, "those people will work in our mines and work for free." The horror of what he proposed took a moment to sink into his sons' minds. He was describing a systematized form of slavery, legal on paper, masked as law enforcement. Tomas felt a sickness rise within him, yet somewhere deep in his heart, an inner darkness whispered that his father was right. In this wild land, only the strong survived, and the Saldivars were destined to be the strongest of all. "And if they resist?" Diego asked. "Then we'll apply frontier law," Ignacio replied coldly. "Smugglers and illegals have no right to appeal to the crown. We are the law here." That dawn, as the French caravan slept peacefully by their campfires, believing themselves under the protection of the Presidio, the Saldivars and 20 of their most ruthless soldiers surrounded them. When Ignacio approached the leader of the caravan, a merchant named Marcel Dubois, his expression was friendly, almost welcoming. "Señor Dubois," Ignacio greeted warmly, "I trust you've rested well. Unfortunately, I bring troubling news that may delay your journey." Dubois, an experienced trader, immediately grew wary. "What kind of trouble, Captain?" "We've received reports," Ignacio said smoothly, "that your caravan carries goods of questionable origin. As a representative of the Spanish crown, I am obligated to investigate." "Our papers are in perfect order," Dubois protested. "We've paid every tax in Veracruz. We have authorization from the Viceroy himself." Ignacio pretended to study the documents with care, while his sons quietly moved into position around the camp. Even the horses seemed restless, sensing what was to come. "The documents seem in order," Ignacio finally said, "but the law allows me to detain one member of your group for a more detailed interrogation. It's routine, nothing to worry about." Dubois's blood ran cold. "Detain who?" Ignacio pointed to a young woman, barely 18, dark-skinned, trembling. Her name was Maria, a slave separated from her family in Louisiana to be sold in Mexico. "We'll question her regarding her acquisition. If everything checks out, she'll be released within a few days." It was the first of many lies. Dubois protested, threatened to report him to higher authorities. But Ignacio held all the legal power he needed. As a frontier captain, he had absolute authority to detain anyone suspected of illegal activity, and a slave without papers was, by definition, suspicious. Dubois had no choice. He left Maria behind, consoling himself with Ignacio's false promise of her eventual release. She was never released. That very evening, Maria was taken to an abandoned mine 3 kilometers from the Presidio, where she would spend the rest of her short life extracting silver for the Saldivar's fortune. Thus, the first human tax was collected, and with it was born the most diabolical system of exploitation the northern frontier would ever know. In the following months, Ignacio's administrative reform completely transformed the frontier. Word of the new inspection system spread like wildfire among traders and smugglers, but not in the way one might expect. Instead of avoiding the region, many began to prefer it. Ignacio had turned blackmail into an art. For legitimate caravans, he offered total protection in exchange for one person, usually the weakest or least valuable member. For smugglers, he provided forged papers, armed escorts, and safe passage. In exchange for 3. His genius lay in the illusion of legality. He established an official border inspection office, complete with registries, seals, and bureaucratic procedures that made it all appear part of the colonial system. Every person taken was listed as detained for questioning, with release dates that would never come. Tomás, the friar, became an essential part of the operation. Each Sunday, he delivered sermons to the community, twisting scripture to justify the family's crimes. "Brothers," he preached, "remember that our Lord expelled the merchants from the temple. Here, on this savage frontier, we are his instruments, separating the faithful from the wicked, the loyal subjects of the crown from the traitors and smugglers." And so began the reign of the Saldivars, a dynasty of terror cloaked in the robes of piety and the language of law. The first man to uncover the true nature of Ignacio Saldivar's inspection system was a Spanish merchant named Eduardo Vasquez. He had the misfortune of losing his 16-year-old son, Manuel, to the human tax in March 1749. 3 months later, just as Ignacio had promised, Vasquez returned to San Miguel de los Reyes to reclaim his boy and continue his journey to California. He arrived at the Presidio carrying hope in his heart, a hope that would soon be crushed forever. Ignacio received him in his office with his usual cordial smile, though in his cold gray eyes now glimmered the confidence of a man who no longer felt the need to hide. "Señor Vasquez, what a pleasure to see you again," the captain said smoothly. "Unfortunately, our investigation concerning your son has revealed complications." "Complications?" Vasquez asked, his voice trembling. "What kind of complications?" During questioning, Ignacio replied, "Your son revealed information suggesting ties to anti-colonial activities. We must retain him until we verify the data with the authorities in Mexico City." Vasquez felt the world collapse beneath him. "That's impossible. Manuel is only a boy. He's never been involved in politics." Ignacio's tone hardened. "Señor Vasquez, are you questioning the official procedures of the Spanish crown?" Because if you are, I might begin to suspect you share your son's rebellious ideas. The threat was clear. Vasquez understood that not only had he lost his son, his own life was now in danger if he pressed further. He left the Presidio empty-handed and broken-hearted. But he did not give up. Over the next weeks, Vasquez began to investigate discreetly. He spoke with soldiers, questioned travelers, and slowly pieced together the nightmare the Saldivars had created. His discovery was worse than any fever dream. Manuel had never been questioned. He had been sold to operators of a secret silver mine in the mountains, forced to work in chains alongside dozens of others who had been detained under the same pretext. Most died within months from exhaustion and malnutrition. But Vasquez also learned something else. He was not alone. There were at least 20 other fathers, husbands, and brothers who had lost loved ones to the so-called inspection system. All had been told the same lies. All had been met with the same silence. Desperate, Eduardo faced a terrible choice. To report the Saldivars, he would have to travel to Mexico City, a journey of months with no guarantee of success. Ignacio had powerful allies in the colonial administration. Any official inquiry would reach San Miguel before Vasquez did, giving the family time to erase every trace. To rescue his son himself was suicidal. The Saldivars controlled not only the Presidio but the entire surrounding region. They had spies in every town, loyal soldiers at every checkpoint, and partners among the wealthiest merchants on the frontier. Then, one stormy night in April 1749, Vasquez made his decision. He rode through the rain-soaked desert toward the mountains where he believed his son was held. When he reached the mine, what he found there shattered his understanding of human cruelty. The place was not merely a work camp, it was a subterranean hell. Over 60 people lived chained in darkness, laboring 14 hours a day. They slept in carved stone cells, fed once daily with food barely fit for animals. And worst of all, Manuel was gone. According to the survivors, he had died 2 months earlier in a tunnel collapse. His body had been thrown into a bottomless pit at the mine's core. That night, beneath the lightning-split sky, Eduardo Vasquez swore an oath. If the authorities would not bring justice, he would. He would bring the Saldivars down, even if it cost him his life. His search for justice led him along roads he had never imagined. His first stop was Santa Fe, hoping to find honest colonial officials beyond the Saldivars' influence. But there, too, corruption awaited him. Governor Don Carlos Mendoza received Vasquez courteously in his palace. But when the merchant described the crimes committed in San Miguel, the governor's expression darkened. "Señor Vasquez," Mendoza interrupted, "the accusations you're making are extremely serious. Do you have documentary evidence of these alleged irregularities?" "My son has vanished," Vasquez pleaded, "along with dozens of others. The San Cristobal mine," Mendoza cut him off coldly, "is a legally registered enterprise employing volunteer workers under contract." "Volunteers," Vasquez cried. "They are chained, treated worse than animals." The governor stood, pointing toward the door. "Then you have been misled by malicious rumors. Captain Saldivar is an exemplary officer of the crown. His frontier methods have been personally praised by the viceroy himself. If you continue spreading such calumnies, I will charge you with sedition." Vasquez left the palace with nothing but despair and understanding. This was bigger than one family. The Saldivars were part of a network of corruption that reached the highest ranks of the colonial regime. Everyone, from soldiers to governors, profited from the human tax and the mines. But despair sometimes breeds a kind of madness, and madness can give birth to determination. If justice could not be found through official channels, he would seek it by other means. In the darkest quarter of Santa Fe, Vasquez entered a tavern called El Coyote Sediento, the thirsty coyote. There he met a man who would change everything. Joaquin Morales, a former soldier who had deserted after witnessing atrocities committed by his own superiors against indigenous communities. Morales was scarred by war, hardened by betrayal. Yet he still clung to a soldier's code of honor. "You're asking me to attack a royal presidio?" Morales asked after hearing Vasquez's story. "I'm asking you," Vasquez replied, "to help me free innocent people enslaved by criminals wearing royal uniforms." Morales thought for several days. Finally, he nodded. "We can't storm the presidio directly. That's suicide. But if you give me time, maybe we can find another way." Over the following weeks, Morales used his contacts among deserters, smugglers, and traders to map the Saldivar's operations. What he uncovered was far beyond what Vasquez had imagined. The San Cristobal mine was only one of 5 secret mines under the family's control. They had built an entire criminal empire hidden beneath the banner of the Spanish crown. They ran safe houses along trade routes where merchants could buy slaves without questions, and a courier network that kept them in contact with corrupt officials from Veracruz to California. Money, people, and information moved like blood through the veins of a vast underground beast. But the most horrifying discovery was something the Saldivars called the permanent solution. Instead of constantly replacing workers who died, they had begun forcing enslaved women to reproduce, creating a second generation of slaves born in captivity. Children who would never know the meaning of freedom. "This isn't slavery anymore," Morales told Vasquez grimly. "It's systematic genocide. They're trying to breed an enslaved population that will never claim liberty, because it will never have known it." The revelation left Vasquez speechless. His son was dead, but now dozens of children were being born in those mines. Children who would never see sunlight, who would grow up believing chains were the natural order of the world. That was when Eduardo Vasquez and Joaquin Morales conceived the plan that would change everything. They would not attack the Saldivars head-on. They would destroy them from within, using the family's own greed as the weapon. The plan that Vasquez and Morales devised was as bold as it was desperate. They would infiltrate the Saldivar organization by pretending to be corrupt merchants seeking partnership in their human trafficking network. To make it believable, they needed forged documents, a convincing backstory, and, most importantly, enough money to make their offer irresistible. Morales called in every favor he had left among soldiers, smugglers, and black market scribes. Within weeks, he obtained papers identifying them as representatives of a supply company from Guadalajara, a respectable merchant group supposedly looking for laborers for the sugar plantations in the South. The story was plausible. Although the trade in indigenous slaves was officially banned, it was still widely practiced in secret throughout New Spain. Vasquez, meanwhile, sold everything he owned. His house in Durango, his horses, his reserves of silver. Everything he had earned in 20 years of honest commerce. The money would serve not only to fund the operation, but to prove their credibility to Ignacio Saldivar himself. In September of 1749, exactly 1 year after his son's disappearance, Eduardo Vasquez returned to San Miguel de los Reyes. This time not as a victim, but as a predator in disguise. Morales rode beside him, posing as his business partner. Their arrival was met with none of the suspicion Vasquez had feared. Instead, Ignacio received them with open arms. He invited them into his private office, offered Spanish brandy, and treated them like honored guests. Men of business, not beggars. "Gentlemen," Ignacio said with a smile, "I appreciate your honesty. Too many merchants waste time pretending their operations are completely legal. Tell me, what kind of business are you really in?" Morales, fully in character, answered smoothly, "Captain Saldivar, our contacts in Guadalajara say you are a pragmatic man, the kind of man one can do serious business with." Ignacio's smile widened. And what kind of business would that be? Vasquez forced himself to speak through the bile rising in his throat. We require a steady supply of workers for our plantations. Strong young men who can endure the tropical sun, and young women capable of sustaining the population. We pay well for quality and discretion. Ignacio leaned forward, intrigued. How well? 50 silver pesos for each male laborer between 15 and 25, Vasquez said evenly. 75 for women of childbearing age. And we're talking about regular orders, at least 20 workers every 3 months. For a moment, Ignacio's gray eyes gleamed with raw greed. The figures were astronomical, equivalent to a soldier's yearly wage for a single person. Your proposal is intriguing, he said finally. However, I must verify your credentials before proceeding with a deal of this scale. During the following days, while Ignacio's men investigated their false identities, Vasquez and Morales were kept as honored guests within the Presidio. That unexpected hospitality gave them unprecedented access to the heart of the Saldivar Empire, and what they witnessed confirmed every nightmare they had imagined. Each morning before sunrise, supply caravans arrived at the fortress. But among crates of food and tools came people, chained, terrified, and silent. They were immediately sorted by strength and usefulness. The strongest went to the mines. The young women were separated for special purposes, and children under 12 vanished into underground tunnels that Vasquez had not yet explored. Rodrigo Saldivar, the eldest son, oversaw field operations with a chilling efficiency. Each new prisoner was branded with a hot iron on the left arm, registered in detailed ledgers listing their age, origin, physical abilities, and estimated market value. Then they were assigned to specific facilities like livestock being cataloged for sale. Diego, the middle son, managed the accounting and trade relations. His office was filled with maps marked with routes, correspondence with clients across New Spain, and ledgers that treated human lives as commodities. Vasquez managed to glimpse a few entries. 20 young males, delivered to Hacienda Morelos, 1,000 pesos. 15 fertile females, sold to Plantation Veracruz, 1,125 pesos. 10 children under 8, special purpose. No price recorded. And then there was Tomas the friar. He performed weekly masses for the community, including soldiers, merchants, and visiting officials, preaching his own perverted theology. Every Sunday, after the sermon, he would descend into the tunnels to bless the enslaved workers, whispering sermons about divine will and eternal salvation through obedience. Vasquez heard him once, and the sound of the friar's calm, sanctimonious voice among the sobs of chained men and women nearly drove him mad. On the 5th day, he witnessed something that almost shattered his disguise. A young pregnant woman, barely 17, was dragged into the courtyard, screaming in pain. Instead of being helped, she was taken to a building Vasquez had assumed was a storage barn. Morales, following his instincts as a soldier, managed to sneak close enough to look inside. What he saw confirmed their worst fears. It was a nursery. Inside, enslaved women gave birth on filthy straw floors under the watch of soldiers. Their newborns were immediately taken away, raised in separate quarters, while the mothers were sent back to the mines within days. That night, Morales whispered to Vasquez, "They're not killing the babies. They're raising them. I counted at least 30 children under 5 in that building, all born in captivity." The revelation left both men trembling. Vasquez wanted to draw his gun and kill Ignacio that very night, but Morales restrained him. "Not yet," he said. "We need proof. We end this by exposing everything." Their opportunity came a day later. Ignacio had completed his background check and invited them to a private dinner. "Gentlemen," he said, "my contacts in Guadalajara confirm that you are legitimate businessmen. Tomorrow, I'll show you exactly what kind of merchandise we can provide." The next morning, Ignacio led them through a hidden passage behind the chapel, a tunnel carved deep into the mountain rock. Torches flickered along the spiraling walls, casting a dizzying dance of light and shadow. "This tunnel," Ignacio explained with pride, "connects the Presidio to our 5 main facilities. It was excavated by workers who, shall we say, no longer needed to keep the secret." The implication was clear. Those who had built the tunnel were dead. At its end lay a vast natural cavern, transformed into a subterranean city of horror. Dormitories carved into rock, workshops where tools and weapons were made, a crude infirmary, and an area Ignacio called administration. Administration turned out to be a chamber of torture. Here, new captives were interrogated to determine if their families could pay ransom, if they had useful skills, or if they knew of future targets. Ignacio spoke of it all with pride. "As you can see," he said, "our operation is entirely self-sustaining. Our workers mine silver, forge their own tools, grow their own food in underground gardens, even raise livestock in the lower caverns. It's a fully functioning city beneath the earth." "How many people are down here?" Vasquez asked, barely holding his composure. "At the moment, around 300, Ignacio answered casually. "But the total capacity is 500, and we're expanding every month. 300 souls, buried alive in darkness, forced to labor until death." Vasquez felt his knees weaken, but the horror was not over yet. Ignacio led them to the deepest part of the cave, where the air grew colder and smelled of decay. "This," he said, pointing to a black abyss, "is our solution for workers who are no longer productive." It was a natural pit, seemingly bottomless. "It's quite convenient," Ignacio added. "It eliminates evidence and saves us the trouble of digging graves." Morales, who had seen battlefields and massacres, turned pale. "How many?" he whispered. "Oh, it's hard to keep count," Ignacio said thoughtfully. 200, maybe 3. Diego keeps better records." That was the breaking point. Vasquez knew he couldn't endure another moment of pretending. He wanted to draw his knife, to plunge it into Ignacio's chest, but Morales gripped his shoulder firmly. "Not now," he hissed. "We're almost there." Ignacio smiled, unaware of the storm behind their eyes. "Gentlemen," he said, "I suggest we begin with a small shipment, 5 young males, to test the quality. You can take possession tomorrow once payment is complete." That night, in their quarters, Vasquez and Morales made their final plan. They would attack during the transfer, free as many prisoners as possible, even if it meant their deaths. If they could create enough chaos, someone might escape and carry word of San Miguel's horrors to the outside world. But they didn't know that someone had been listening. That night, the air around the Presidio felt different. Heavy, electric, filled with the quiet before a storm. Vasquez and Morales sat in the dim light of their quarters, whispering their plan in hushed tones, their pistols laid out on the table beside a single flickering candle. "At dawn," Morales murmured, "they'll bring the prisoners to the lower courtyard for inspection. That's when we strike. You free as many as you can. I'll deal with the guards." "And Ignacio?" Vasquez asked, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and dread. "Leave him to me," Morales said grimly. "He'll answer for what he's done." But as they plotted, they were not alone. Behind the thin clay wall, a pair of cold gray eyes watched and listened, belonging to none other than Diego Saldivar. He had grown suspicious from the start. The supposed merchants had asked too many questions, taken too much interest in the tunnels and the ledgers. Now, Their whispered words confirmed his fears. Diego slipped away silently and hurried to his father's chambers. "Father," he said, "they're not merchants. They're spies, or worse." Ignacio looked up from the desk where he had been writing. "Are you certain?" "They're planning to free the prisoners at dawn." Ignacio's lips curled into a predatory smile. "Then we'll give them exactly what they want, and make an example of them in front of everyone." At sunrise, the bells of the chapel rang out as usual, summoning the workers from the tunnels to the central courtyard. The sound echoed off the stone walls, mixing with the moans of the waking prisoners. But today, something felt off. Too many guards, too many rifles gleaming in the cold morning light. Vasquez and Morales stepped out of their quarters, each concealing a small pistol beneath their cloaks. The plan was simple: create a distraction, release the chains, arm the prisoners, and fight their way out through the western gate. But as soon as they entered the courtyard, Ignacio appeared at the top of the stairs, flanked by his sons. Rodrigo on his right, Diego on his left, and the friar Tomas standing below with a rosary in hand. "Gentlemen," Ignacio's voice boomed, "I hope you slept well. Before we begin our little transaction, I'd like to make an announcement." Morales froze. The tone was wrong, too formal, too controlled. He glanced at Vasquez, who instinctively reached for his weapon under his coat. Ignacio clapped his hands twice. Immediately, soldiers surrounded them, rifles aimed, bayonets gleaming. "Drop your weapons," Ignacio said softly, almost kindly. "You've both played your parts admirably, but the curtain falls here." Vasquez's heart pounded. Morales raised his hands slowly, trying to buy time. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding," Ignacio interrupted, descending the stairs. "You see, my sons tell me you've been very curious about our operations. Too curious. And last night, one of my men heard your plans." He stopped inches away from Vasquez, looking him in the eye. "Eduardo Vasquez, merchant of Durango. You should have stayed in your shop." Vasquez's blood ran cold. His real name, his real identity, they had known all along. "How long?" he whispered. "Since the day you arrived," Ignacio said. "You think we'd let a stranger walk into our home without checking who he really was? Your forged papers were good, but not that good." Then he smiled, that same smile that had haunted Vasquez's nightmares. "But don't worry, you'll still be useful to me. You and your friend will serve as a lesson to anyone foolish enough to defy the Saldivars." They were dragged to the center of the courtyard. Hundreds of enslaved men and women were forced to gather and watch. Tomas, the friar, raised his hands and began to pray in Latin as if blessing a sacrifice. Ignacio took Vasquez's pistol and examined it. Beautiful weapon, Spanish steel, expensive for a merchant. He pointed it casually at Morales. "Where did you get it?" "From a soldier who had more honor than you'll ever have," Morales spat. Ignacio's smile didn't fade. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the courtyard like a thunderclap. Morales fell to the ground, blood spilling into the dust. The enslaved workers flinched but remained silent, too terrified to move. Ignacio handed the pistol back to one of his guards. "Bury him in the pit. Let the earth swallow him like the rest." Vasquez screamed, lunging forward, but was struck across the face with a rifle butt and thrown to his knees. Blood dripped from his lip as he looked up at the man who had taken everything from him. "You killed my son," he hissed. "And now you kill the only man who tried to stop you." Ignacio crouched beside him. "You misunderstand, Señor Vasquez. I didn't kill your son. The mine did. I simply gave him the honor of serving the crown until his last breath." He stood and addressed the crowd. "Let this be a lesson to you all. Those who obey live, those who rebel join the dead." But even as Ignacio spoke, something unexpected began to happen. From the crowd, a low murmur rose, faint at first, then louder. It was the prisoners, whispering, growling, gathering courage in numbers. They had seen enough death. They had lost children, lovers, friends, everything. And now, before them, stood the monster responsible. The first rock flew from the crowd and struck Rodrigo in the shoulder. He cursed and raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the mob surged forward. In seconds, the courtyard exploded into chaos. Guards shouted, rifles cracked, chains snapped. The enslaved workers, fueled by years of rage, overwhelmed the soldiers. Men and women seized shovels, stones, anything they could use as weapons. Vasquez used the chaos to crawl toward Morales's body, but the soldier was already gone, his lifeless eyes staring at the gray morning sky. Another explosion echoed, this time from the chapel. The oil lamps had been knocked over during the struggle, and flames now devoured the wooden beams, turning the crucifix into a torch. The entire presidio began to burn. Ignacio shouted orders, but his voice was drowned by screams and gunfire. Rodrigo tried to rally the guards, only to be dragged into the mob and beaten to death. Diego fled toward the tunnels, clutching his ledgers, while Tomas knelt before the burning altar, muttering prayers as the roof collapsed above him. Amid the chaos, Vasquez grabbed a rifle and fired at Ignacio, the bullet grazing the captain's shoulder. Ignacio turned, eyes burning with hatred. "You'll die screaming for this?" he roared, lunging at Vasquez. The two men collided, falling into the dust. They fought like beasts, fists, knees, teeth. Vasquez managed to grab a fallen knife, plunging it into Ignacio's side. The captain gasped, staggered, and fell backward into the firelight. For a moment, everything went still. The flames reflected in Ignacio's lifeless eyes, and Vasquez, covered in blood and ash, felt neither triumph nor relief, only emptiness. By the time dawn fully broke, the presidio was a ruin. Half the buildings were reduced to ashes, the tunnels collapsed, and the survivors scattered into the desert. The legend says that only one man was later found wandering the wasteland, half-dead, delirious, clutching a scorched piece of parchment. It was Eduardo Vasquez. When rescued by missionaries weeks later, he spoke of what he had seen: the mines, the children, the darkness beneath the earth. But the authorities dismissed him as insane. His testimony was buried, his warnings ignored. San Miguel de los Reyes was rebuilt years later, under a new name, and the Saldivar family? They vanished, but the silver continued to flow. The mines kept producing wealth, though no one ever saw the workers again. Some say Ignacio's descendants still run them, hidden deep beneath the desert. Others claim that, on moonless nights, the wind carries screams from beneath the sand, the voices of the condemned, still digging in the dark. Nearly 40 years after the fire that consumed San Miguel de los Reyes, an elderly friar appeared at the gates of a Franciscan convent in Zacatecas. He was frail, gaunt, and nearly blind. His hands trembled, his robe was torn, and his lips whispered prayers that made no sense to anyone who heard them. When the brothers asked his name, he replied in a broken voice, "I am Father Tomas of the house of Saldivar." At first, they thought he was delirious, another wandering penitent seeking forgiveness. But when he presented an old wooden box wrapped in rosary beads, their curiosity grew. Inside the box were dozens of yellowed pages, covered in shaky handwriting, written with what looked disturbingly like dried blood. He claimed it was his confession, and the truth of what happened beneath the desert of San Miguel. In those pages, Tomas recounted everything: the crimes, the horrors, the death of his family. But what disturbed the friars most wasn't his remorse. It was the belief that he hadn't survived by chance. According to his confession, Tomas had fled the burning Presidio the night of the revolt, escaping through one of the underground tunnels. He wandered for days through the desert without food or water, until he stumbled upon a cave where he collapsed from exhaustion. He wrote that when he awoke, he wasn't alone. "I saw them," the confession reads, "the ones who had died below the mine. Their eyes glowed in the dark like embers, and their mouths whispered without sound. They told me I could never be free, that the sin of my family would cling to my soul until the end of days." Tomas believed that he had been chosen, not for salvation, but as the eternal witness of his family's damnation. Every night, he claimed, the dead returned to him, dragging their chains, asking for the prayers he could no longer remember. He spent years wandering from mission to mission, trying to confess, trying to die, but he couldn't. Each time he fell ill, he dreamed of the pit beneath the mine, and a voice whispering, "Not yet, you haven't told the truth." So he began to write. Page after page, he described the full extent of his family's crimes, how the inspection system had turned into an empire of slavery and death, how Ignacio's greed had devoured not only strangers but their own blood. He confessed to having blessed the mines, knowing what they truly were. He admitted to performing false baptisms for the children born in captivity, marking them as Christians before they were sent to die underground. "I baptized them," he wrote, "not to save them but to ease my guilt. I told myself that if their souls belonged to God, their suffering would end in heaven. But the truth is, I only wanted to believe they would forgive me." As the years passed, the visions grew stronger. He wrote of hearing footsteps behind him when no one was there, of hearing the sound of picks striking rock in the silence of the night, of waking up to find his rosary covered in dust, as if it had been buried beneath the earth. In his final entry, Tomas described a dream, or perhaps a revelation. "I stood again before the pit," he wrote. "The fire below burned brighter than ever, and I saw the faces of my father and my brothers staring up at me. But they were not men anymore. Their flesh was gone, their bones glowing red like coals. They called my name and said, 'One must remain to tell our story. One must suffer so the rest may never be forgotten.' And I understood that I was not the last of the Saldivars. I was their punishment." After that final entry, the manuscript ends abruptly. Tomas died that same night, kneeling before the altar, his hands clutching the rosary so tightly that the beads cut into his flesh. The friars who found him sealed his writings in the convent archive. For centuries, the document lay hidden, unmentioned, unread, covered in dust. Only in the early 1900s did historians rediscover it, though most dismissed it as delusional rambling. Yet, when researchers visited the ruins of the old Presidio, they found traces of truth buried beneath the sands. Collapsed tunnels, human bones, rusted chains, and at the center of it all, a deep, black pit that seemed to have no end. Locals still avoid that place. They call it El Pozo de los Saldivar, the Saldivar pit. They say that when the wind blows from the north, you can hear the clinking of chains beneath the ground. And if you listen closely, you'll hear a man's voice whispering prayers for forgiveness that will never come. The end.